Welcome to the 7th edition of the Halifax Black Film Festival, HBFF, created by the Fabian Coles Foundation and presented by TD in collaboration with Global News. HBFF 23 runs from February 24th to the 28th, 2023, online and in person. Find the complete program and grab your online on access pass and individual tickets on halifaxblackfilm.com. The Black Market Series is presented by Bell Fund and co-presented by the Halifax Regional Library and sees industry professionals discuss today's most critical industry and social issues. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Francine Alfred, and I am honored to be the moderator for today's panel. I'm an actress, model, and host. I'm also the owner of Talent Unleashed, which is a networking and marketing company that helps to promote actors to some of the top career makers in the entertainment industry. Talent Unleashed also organizes actor showcases for some of the top casting directors in North America. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that we are meeting in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship. Today's panel is entitled Why Racialized Casting Directors Are Key to Boosting Representation on Screen. The lack of representation on and off screen goes far beyond the performers, directors, and creators we see every day in the news. Black and racialized creative leaders bring unique perspectives and enrich the stories being told as well. The choice of the right casting director impacts the entire universe of characters surrounding the protagonists. Black and racialized casting directors are more invested in creating an ensemble of main, supporting, and guest players who represent the diversity we see every day on the streets. With the fight for proper representation growing every day, are we seeing that fight extending to casting directors being hired in the industry? Are the executives, networks, and streaming services working to include more Black and racialized casting directors in their projects' teams? We have the pleasure of speaking with some of the leading industry professionals in the entertainment industry. First, we have Hank White. He is a film industry veteran from Nova Scotia with over 50 years of experience as a filmmaker, actor, producer, writer, production manager, casting director, as well as director in stage and film. Next, we have Zora DeHorter. She is a Hollywood film, television, and commercial casting director. We also have Tiana Jackson. She is a Hollywood talent agent and owner of Jackson Agency. And last, but certainly not least, we have Kumbi from Nova Scotia. She is an award winning actor, director, writer, producer, as well as a member of Actress Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Hello, everyone. So, how's everyone doing?
Good.
Great.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So, let's start with each of you telling a bit about yourselves. So, we'll start with Hank, then we'll go to Zora, then we'll go to Tiana, and then Kumbi.
Okay, I'm Hank White. I'm Acadian Mi'kmaq from Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I'm happy to be here.
Perfect. Excellent.
Hello, I'm Zora DeHorter. I'm a casting director, and the initials after my name, CSA, stands for Casting Society. We no longer say America because we're actually international. We're all over the world as casting directors, and I'm on the board of directors of Casting Society. And I've been casting film, television, and commercials in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles area, although I do cast things that are out. I've just cast a TV series that's been shooting in Atlanta, and I work with clients all over the world. Thanks for having me.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tiana Jackson. I'm a talent and literary agent. I'm also the first Black woman ever elected to the Association of Talent Agents Board of Directors and a co-founding member of the Black Agents Network.
Hi there, I'm Kumbi. I use she, they pronouns. I'm an actor, director, writer, filmmaker from Mi'kma'ki, Ektubuktuk, Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. And I'm also the vice president for Actora Maritimes, as well as serving on the National Women's Committee and the National D&IB Committee. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. So, as I mentioned earlier, today's panel is entitled Why Racialized Casting Directors Are Key to Boosting Representation on Screen. So, let's discuss. To open up the discussion, here's the first question. Do you think diverse casting behind the camera helps to promote more diversity in front of the camera? So, Zora, we'll start with you.
So the question is if behind the scenes is making it in front of the scenes.
Yes, if I'm diverse casting, yes, behind the camera, if that helps to promote for more diversity in front of the camera as well.
Yes. Yes, it balances it out.
Right.
Obviously, if there's one happening, usually the other one seems to follow suit. I think the Black Lives Matter movement was huge for us.
Yes.
Was huge for us as a people.
Yeah.
I know it changed for me in the sense that I was getting more meetings with executives that weren't necessarily happening before. People are becoming more accountable. Networks are becoming more accountable. Studios are becoming more accountable. Executives are becoming more accountable. And like I said, I'm on the board of directors for Casting Society, and I'm really seeing the difference. As the board in Casting Society, let's be honest, 70% of casting directors are white women. So that's what was on the board. That was what was represented. And now on the board of directors, there's, I think, people of color. There's, I think, 6 of us, 7, maybe 8 of us. Whereas when I first joined, it was just 2 of us. So that already shows the difference, just even with the casting directors board. So I feel like it's having a change. It's getting more representation, more accountability. That's what I call it, as accountability, because we have to be out there. We have to be represented. I mean, you can't do Black shows and not have Black casting directors that are either consulting or being part of it. So I'm seeing more of that. Like I did 2 Disney pilots. There was pretty much a Black show, Black TV shows for Black teens. And I was one of the consulting additional casting directors. So I think it's gotten a lot better. Yes, I'm very happy about that.
Right. Thank you. Tiana?
I think it depends. I deal with the literary side as well. And so we ran into some issues when it came to that accountability with the networks. Making public pledges, saying X amount of % of writers will be this. And then when I presented these writers that were more than qualified, they weren't entirely green, we still ran into some problems, mainly the fact that they wanted mid-level writers, meaning mid-level management. Right. And so often I would pose the question, how do you expect to find these people when you never hired them to begin with? So for me as a boutique, especially, which is, a place for new emerging artists to have representation and have someone to fight for them, for me, it's still an uphill battle.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Kumbi?
I mean, to be honest, in some ways, I agree with both what Zora and Tiana have said. I think there are so many ways where things feel different. I'll go back to your question about if there is, a representation behind the camera. Is there therefore representation in front of the camera? And I think the answer simply is yes, as Zora said. Oftentimes, as writers, we're drawn to stories that we relate to, and so it just makes sense that those often have people who look like us. And so when there are racialized people behind the camera, they often want to tell those stories that they connect to, that they relate to, that make sense to them. And so I think it just, follows.
Right, great. Thank you. Hank?
I guess the question is one of educating casting directors and executives and producers in order to bring it. I always say to by friends that are in the film industry, if you don't see yourself in your cast and crew, then shame on you, because if we don't do it, it won't get done. So anybody who's going into the industry, so I feel yes, we need to. It's a bit difficult. Um, Back in 1979, I auditioned for a soap opera, Another World, and I met Dorothy Pusser, who was the casting director. And I came back to Halifax and said, I'm going to start doing casting. And that's when I started Hank White Productions. And I was bringing people I grew up in Halifax on Kennard Street, which was predominantly Black and Indigenous and poor white. And so I knew people that went to was acting with me when I was a child. The Central Commons, the playgrounds, Department of Recreation, had musical programs. And all of the kids in my neighborhood would go over and we would sing, we would act and do stuff like that. So I think educating the casting directors, no matter what color they are or what race they are, and also bringing new people in, bringing people, Indigenous people in to train them how to cast. I started a shadow program back in 2004 to bring crew in, because I didn't see anybody in the crew. And so it's something that, yes, the casting director is important. Also, the producer has to be aware and educated that diversity has to be in your film. It should be.
Great, thank you for that. Any other thoughts that any of you want to share before we go on? Sure. I thought Kumbi wanted to say something. Go ahead.
I just wanted to, I don't know if Hank and I have talked about this before, but because I think we disagree a little bit. Well, we agree that representation behind the camera often leads to representation in front of the camera. I just have to say that I do somewhat resent the idea that we have to, or that it is on us and we shoulder the entire burden of that. Because while I do think it is true, and I'm all about leaving a legacy better than what we had for us, I do think that we need allies, and it's not only the racialized folks who have racialized projects or whatever it is who have to then build an entire industry after. I think it needs to be a community effort. So I just wanted to add that.
Sure. Hank, did you want to respond, or?
Mic on. No, I agree with you. What I was referring to was when I talked to my friends of color and my Indigenous friends, telling them that, it's not up to you, but if you don't see yourself in your cast and your crew, then it's shame on you. You have to make sure that if you go to a casting director, that you're a producer and you go to a casting director, that they know that you want diversity in your cast and your crew.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, I think I pretty much agree with everyone, and all of you brought up great thoughts. I think it's probably all of our responsibility, right, to see that change. And yeah, you're right. Especially Zora, what you were saying. I think after George Floyd, you definitely started to see that shift, and definitely more of these kind of discussions. So I'm glad we're having it today. And even if we see this question from, we have different points of view, it's good that at least, it's good that we're having this discussion. And I agree, it's up to all of us to try and make that difference. Yeah. So
can I just say something? Sure. I have to say something, because I don't want to be that combative, black, angry black women. But to be honest with you, right. I have kind of a problem with the white males saying that. I'm sorry. I mean, you're the ones who are, I feel constantly, I'm butting heads with the white male all the time. I mean, because when I was working for a network, I'm not going to say which one, I was casting a TV show, and there was a black role. There was a black female role. There was 3 women. There was a black female lead. And I wanted to try and once in a while, have an Asian boyfriend or a white boyfriend. No, he could only be black. What am I supposed to do with that? I mean, I'm the executives of the network, white males, are telling me that I can just say, okay, unless I want to lose my job. All I can do is try and advocate. I can try and advocate for diversity, but ultimately, it's those white men that are the ones pulling the purse strings. They're the ones pulling the purse strings. So to say that we should have to be out there and demand it, there's only so much demanding we can do as an individual. If I don't have 10 other Black casting directors behind me saying, yes, we're not going to go on with this role unless she has a Black, an Asian boyfriend, then if it's just me, then I'm just going to have to say, okay, because it's just me against all these, $1 million executives when I'm just being paid an nth of a penny of that. And I'm only just another, pauper when it comes to the chain of line of people. So to say that we should be out there and it's our combined, we have to be the ones, then there's only so much we can do, I hate to say. I mean, Tijuana kind of said that when she said at her small boutique agency, she tries to advocate for her clients, but they'll say, oh, you're too small an agency, we're going to go with ICM instead. What can she do?
It is about advocacy. There's a lack
I agree.
Right.
I agree. I cast a commercial, and it was for a pharmacy, and I sent a Black actor there, and I had the producer call me up and say, you sent me a Black actor. I said, no, I sent you an actor that can play the role. He just happens to be Black. And then I said, we have Indigenous doctors, we have Black doctors, we have, so I sent you that. And after talking to her, she actually did keep him because he did a really good audition. But,
there you go.
She came and asked that.
Okay, so we'll go on to the next question, and thank you for that. So the next question, with the fight for more diverse representation growing every day, are we seeing that fight extending to casting directors being hired in the industry? So Kumbi, we'll start with you this time.
In all honesty, I think and maybe Hank can speak to this as well because we're based in the same place, but our experience, I think, is actually quite different than some of the other major cities. Being based in Halifax, we just don't really have the infrastructure to have that many casting directors. And so, in all honesty, there's only a few anyways. And so, yes, they are all white. That being said, I'm absolutely seeing way more diverse casting than there ever was before. I'm seeing the breakdown language change, which is really interesting. So we're having that conversation about what that process looks like to make those breakdowns more inclusive and more specific and more clear. But in terms of my exact experience, no, I'm not seeing more racialized casting directors.
Okay, Hank, go ahead.
Kumi's correct. We're a small business here. I do my own casting as I want diversity in my film. When I do get a call up to work on a commercial as a production manager, I will do my own casting as well, because again, the people that were here did not know diversity, so it was kind of hard to get them to adhere to what I thought should have been done.
Okay, thank you. Tiana, what are your thoughts?
It's been a while since I've been inside of a casting office, so I can't really tell you what's going on these days. There have been some incidents we've had in Hollywood that I didn't really have the support that I hope to have given some of the changes in the industry. But I think, like Zora has denoted, that they've made some changes internally, at least in terms of the faces that sit on their board. All I can hope for is that those faces feel empowered enough to actually impact change.
Okay. Zora?
I can't speak to how many people of color, Black casting directors are actually hired. But like I said to you, I've definitely had more meetings following the George Floyd and the pandemic and all that stuff. I had a lot more meetings with studios and networks than ever before. I didn't book any of those jobs, but at least I got an opportunity to sit down at the table with these people and be interviewed and meet with them. I don't know about hirings. I can't speak to that. I don't know the base. I don't know who's hired for what. I feel like it's getting better. I feel like there's more Black stories being told, and I've worked on a few stories that have Black female leads, which I'm really, really happy and excited about. 2 of the projects I just recently cast had Black female leads. So that's really exciting, and I got to cast them the whole series. So that was exciting. Great stories. So that gives me hope too.
Right, excellent. Anybody else before we go to the next question? Okay, so the next question, have changes in the industry, such as virtual auditions, had an impact on diverse casting? So Tiana, I'll start with you.
With the uptick in virtual auditions, we definitely saw more come in. It remains to be seen as whether or not those were just handed out just because, or if it really was because there was interest. So just like Zora was saying, I took a lot of meetings after the murder of George Floyd. I ended up getting recruited into organizations because they finally wanted Black faces in there. But, for me, from a time management standpoint, especially running a boutique that has rosters all over the United States, a couple of folks in Canada, time is money. And so I got burnt out by taking all of these meetings with people who really never intended to do business with us to begin with. They just wanted to appear less racist.
Yes, good point. Thank you. Hank?
That really was a good point. I do get a lot of calls, being Indigenous, and people coming in and saying, could you come on board? Even like coming on as a producer, and I have to watch what they're asking. Am I on because they need to have an Indigenous person on that project? So you have to watch that sort of stuff. Why am I being here? And by the token, like for me, it's my big thing is trying to get more Indigenous, more Mi'kmaq people in the industry here in Nova Scotia. Hence why the shadow program.
Okay, thank you. Zara?
The virtual auditions have just, I love them personally because I think it's not only more BIPOC people, but just more actors in general. The amount of actors I'm able to see now, or self-tape and all that stuff, but the virtual has changed in the sense I'm able to see a lot more people.
Yes.
A lot more people, because in an hour before you could maybe see 5 people because you're waiting for people to drive and find parking and slowing everything down. Whereas now everybody's where they need to be, so they just pop on and pop off. So it's a lot quicker. So I'm able to see a double the amount of people. I'm able to see people from all over the country now. So it's just opened my eyes to the different kinds of talent now. It's just been great to see the wealth of actors and see the diversity of actors. More, Black, Asian, whatever it is. I'm just loving to see the wealth of actors in general. I'm seeing a lot more people. I'm loving it.
Yes. Excellent. Yes. Kumbi.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because that virtual audition opportunity, certainly with the murder of George Floyd and the pandemic, we had a different conversation around barriers and access needs. And so that virtual audition opportunity absolutely removes some major barriers for actors to be able to audition. It used to be, you had to get downtown. So it was like, driving, parking, do you need transportation? Do you have a job that you can just leave at the drop of a hat to drive into like there were so many barriers, and Zoom auditions have removed that. Self-tapes have removed that, which is incredible. But I do think it's a little more complicated than that because, you may be able to have access to that audition, but it doesn't remove the major barriers to the rest of the job. And so do you still have access to training, to actually getting to set, like all of the other things? So you may be getting seen, but are you really being taken seriously? Or, if you're part of the the group, the huge net that is being cast, are people actually really watching those auditions, or are they kind of checking a box? So it's thrilling to hear folks like Zora who are saying, yes, we are watching those and we're discovering new actors. Like, that sounds fantastic. But I also have definitely had a sense that there are times where it's just sort of like, yeah, send us your audition, but it's not necessarily being considered. So I think, yeah, it has removed barriers, but not necessarily sort of made it a completely accessible career.
Yeah, great points. Yeah, I think to an extent I agree with you, Kumbi, as also as an actress. I think we just have to hope that casting directors and associates are looking. But yeah, you all of you raised very, very good points. Yes. And any thoughts before we move on? Sure, go ahead, Hank.
I actually just auditioned a couple of days ago virtually from here. And I find that is really good, and that Kumi's right, in that I recall going into the casting office and not seeing the light shining and say, your camera's not on, to the casting person. And if they didn't want you, they pretended that they were taping you. And, or they, so that stuff happens. Even with the virtual, but the virtual seems to be working pretty good, in that a lot more people are able to be seen, and even if they don't get that part, some of the producers and directors that are seeing those tapes are saying, yeah, I should keep his name or her name. I think they've got something for another role that I'm doing.
Okay, excellent. Any other thoughts before I go to the next question? Okay, so the next question is, are the executives, networks, and streaming services working to include more racialized casting directors as part of their projects' teams? Okay, Hank, I'll start with you this time.
Sorry, I dropped my notes. What was the question
That's
again?
okay. I'm sorry?
Could you repeat the question again?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, are the executives, networks, and streaming services working to include more racialized casting directors as part of their projects' teams?
Okay. I feel that some of them are, but it's still a far cry from what needs to be done. They need to be more inclusive, and again, look inward to themselves and say, am I doing all that I can to make sure that my film or my commercial or my TV show is inclusive? And that includes people in wheelchairs, people with mental disabilities, people with other problems. I did a commercial where I cast a person that had alopecia, and worked out well in that. So, people have to have, the casting people and the directors and producers have to have an open mind to that.
Okay, thank you. Kumbi?
I'm not sure that I can speak to this question because I'm often working in the indie world, and so I'm rarely sort of working with executives or streamers or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, and that's okay. Zora?
I'm in the indie world too, but like I said, I cast a few things for Disney, and I thought they were getting better at adding me to the adding me. So I feel like they're getting better about noticing the casting directors of color and including us in some way in the casting creative process. I like to think that's happening slowly but surely. Yeah. In LA anyway.
Right. Okay. And Tiana?
Yeah, it doesn't apply to me.
No? Yeah. And yes, excellent points. Thank you. Any other thoughts before we go on? Okay. How can casting directors help to push for more diversity in TV and film? Zora, I'll start with you.
Well, like I said, I think it's just continuing to advocate. And when I see the listing on the script and it says blonde, busty, ditzy, I'll say to the producer or director, I'll say, well, actually, I know a lot of Asian women that are busty and ditzy, and I know some Black women that are ditzy and busty. Can I bring those women in? And they go, absolutely, go for it. So I think people are more open to those kind of conversations and seeing it. I mean, ultimately, I think they went with the blonde in the end, but at least they were open to having me bring in diversity and being open to that. Because I always say to them, if you're going to hire me as a casting director, I mean, look at me. I'm a woman of, a diverse woman myself. I want to be able to represent that in what I cast for you. And most producers, absolutely, absolutely go for it. We trust you, whatever you feels best. And I have to say, I've been really lucky. But I do work mostly in the indie world. Even with the TV series I cast, they're all streaming platforms. They're not, the main network stations. So because of that, they were open to everything. And I was able to cast some really colorful, diverse casts. I was really happy.
Great. Tiana?
Yeah, and I think that's the key phrase right there. What Zora's talking about is that a lot of the casting directors of color have been relegated to the independent world, where there seems to be a little bit more of an open mind versus the studio network world, where they really are not pro-integration. When we look at the history of television and film, we can use Hattie McDaniel having to come in through the cook's entrance just to get her Oscar as a prime example of how this industry has been segregated for so long. And because it's such a tight-knit, small industry with a clear group and control, you're in a scenario to where the general public never really did turn their spotlight on the industry until the murder of George Floyd. So here we are now in 2020, now trying to integrate, but even then, there's still quite a bit of segregation, especially when we use the phrase urban and urban markets, right? We always had that phrase, if there were more than 2 Black people on a movie poster, oh, it's an urban film, Right. So I think we're still in our infancy. As woke as we want to pretend that we are as an industry, we're still on year 3. We don't have best practices. We don't have it all figured out. And most of us don't even communicate with one another in the way that we're communicating with one another. I find that often people, especially white men, are very, very afraid to have these conversations, mostly because it's probably a little bit of guilt, but at the same time, they're worried about lawsuits. They're worried about being labeled a certain type of person, when it's really just a lack of inclusivity inherently in their community, right? So when Zora is talking about projects, she's thinking about everyone because she's thinking about good talent. But when a white male is thinking about talent, they're only thinking about people that look like them. And so that's kind of the problem, is that we all live in a world of inclusivity, right? Your butcher might be Asian and your carpenter might be Black. And so you're living in this world where everyone is sort of working together in harmony. But unfortunately, there are people that are still living in a world with a very myopic view and really just focused on people who look like them and themselves and circulating that money within themselves, which is how they've amassed power. Now you're asking them to include a Black woman, a Black guy, an Asian guy, an Indian guy, a Native American guy, and that is scary for them, right? When you have that boys club for so long, the idea of equality is terrifying.
Thank you. Hank?
It's funny. Today I was talking to somebody about crew and casting and that, and he said, I worry about it because what if I have to fire somebody? And I brought them up and I said, well, how would you fire anybody? If they're not working out, you tell them you're not working out, and if it's somebody that you're bringing on as trainee, then you say, take them aside and say, you did that wrong. Try and do better than that. Yeah, it's all a matter of, as everybody's been saying, it's almost a no-brainer to get what we need in this industry and get diversity.
Thank you. Kumbi?
I apologize. I got so lost in everyone's answers. Can you repeat the question?
Oh, yes. How can casting directors help to push for more diversity in TV and film?
Right. Yes. I mean, I think, yeah, everyone has sort of said that it's just about advocating and using your voice because they are in the room because they've been hired. And so they have a unique opportunity. I do think it's interesting, sort of, the phrase "the buck stops where" is coming to mind, and I think it's because when we talk about breakdowns, and for a while there were some really problematic breakdowns that were getting posted and circulated because I think everyone has seen some of those problematic breakdowns, urban and things like that, and I think actors maybe don't necessarily know who is writing those. And so I have often heard casting directors sort of say, well, it's the producers, and the producers saying it's the writers or it's the directors. And no one really knows like who is actually making those decisions, or even who is choosing the people who get brought into the room to tape. So I think there's like a little bit of mystery there outside of the casting world, around like who is making those decisions. But I think ultimately whoever is in the room is advocating for those racialized actors and ideally getting them an opportunity to be seen.
Okay, thanks. So anything else? Okay.
I actually write.
Sure,
I actually write that way when I'm writing with my partner's script. I make sure that in the script has a lot of inclusivity, but openness with the character. So saying what the character personality is like. Mostly, I'm dealing with Indigenous because that's what I know. I know how to be half white and half Mi'kmaq. So you write what you know. But when you look at your other characters, if you look at my feature film that I did years ago, Charlie Zone, it was really diverse. And I did the casting myself because I wanted it. Back then, the casting people that were here cast nepotism, favoritism, and whiteism. And so I had to pretty well make sure that I cast that film myself, including even the background people.
Okay. I'll just add another note, not specifically to Racialized, but just in terms of accessibility and inclusivity. Something I saw recently that one of the casting directors here has done, and it's something so simple, but I think it's indicative of a wider change, where they added another gender option to male, women, and now there's sort of a non-binary, and little things like that I do think are how casting directors are able to advocate for a broader variety of human actor person. And yeah, that was just something that I was like, oh, like those are the little steps that I think actually can make a really big difference.
Sure. Yes.
I have
Thank
a question
you.
for the CDs about that, because
Yes,
part of what I do is stay abreast of all of like the legal regulations and the changes. So like we saw New York pass their transparency law, and then basically Friday afternoon, California passed their transparency law. And what it is saying that for every industry, it's really not specific to entertainment, every job that's posted has to have a clear salary. And most of the time that involves a salary range. I noticed that, especially with the New York breakdowns, the same time that legislature was passed, that's when we started getting additional terms. And so the cynic in me, unfortunately, doesn't feel like this is a change in the casting community. I believe it's just the networks and the studios are following the law now.
I'd be curious to know what the difference was in Canada, because I'm not familiar with the law, but that's an interesting point.
Yes, it is. Yeah, me too. Yeah, I agree. Yes, thank you for that, everyone. Other comments before we go on? Okay. So the next question we have is, how do you see diverse casting practices evolving in the future? Tiana, I'll start with you this time.
It's going to be interesting. AI strikes a lot of fear, right? We had an incident where some voiceover artists recently were noticing some terminology in contracts that would suggest that robots are stealing their jobs, right? Mm-hmm. And so even the founder of, well, I'll say the acquirer of casting networks wrote this op-ed about AI and entertainment, and it was rumored that even there was an attempt to automate castings, to remove casting directors altogether, right? To remove agents altogether. Mm. And it's similar to what you found with the Chat GPT. They're not 100% accurate. There's too many variables when it comes to people. And so we're in a position to where you can't quite rely on AI, but I could see it used to speed up some day-to-day, If you could program an algorithm to check for certain things, I could see how that could lessen the load of a casting director as they're, siphoning through, 6,000 submissions on average now in Los Angeles for, a role. That's a lot of faces. That's an insane volume of work that a person has to go through in a casting office just to whittle it down to making selects to send out auditions. So I could see, more software-based systems coming into play here within the next 10 years for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree. Okay, Kumbi?
That's fascinating. That didn't occur to me at all.
Sorry, I'm blurred.
No, I love it. No, that's fabulous. My mind is like, whoa, yeah, how would that affect our day-to-day? When you asked the question, I immediately went to, ideally, these trends that we've sort of all touched on, where even if it's not working out perfectly, there is still sort of an intention or an idea of an intention. And if we are able to sort of follow that, I think that there will just be more stories created about BIPOC and racialized folks, and differently abled folks and all of that. And so it will just eventually happen that we will have more racialized actors and the whole thing. I think casting will get more nuanced. I keep mentioning it, but I'm just really fascinated by this conversation around these breakdowns and how to make them, specific and clear and inclusive. We haven't talked about this, but white folks who are able to play Russians and Irish people and Scottish people, and they're able to do accents and all of these different things. But then I'm seeing that when it's about, people from a certain African country, then that person has to be from that African country. And I don't have an answer on this, but I'm seeing
now that you mentioned it, let's touch on that, and I'll ask, and I'll, because that's a great point, and I did not even think about this, but let's touch on that, if that's okay. So you know what? I'll go to Zora, right, and then Hank, and then we can continue back about, because that is an excellent point about that. So, or anybody can jump in, right? It could be, I'll go to Zora, Hank, and then if Tiana wants to respond to that as well, and then we can go on. Yes.
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Not question, but you know what, Kumbi, you can say again the point
about...
No,
not that part, the original question.
Okay, yes. The question was, how do you see diverse casting practices evolving in the future?
I think Johan already said it, and we've all touched on it in the sense that it's, like I just said to you, I think mostly, unfortunately, I think it's, we're seeing it in the network. You have All American, you have, Bel Air, you have shows that are, Wonder Years, that's the white Wonder Years is now black Wonder Years. So I guess it's happening already. And I think it's just going to have to keep going. It's going to have to. You can't go backwards now.
No.
Luckily, there's so many streaming platforms now. Like I said, the two shows that I cast are all black, lead roles. Black female leads, which is even more exciting. And I think there has to be more of that. You can't go back now. Hopefully, I don't see how you can.
Yeah, no,
we've crossed the line, so we have to keep going now and just get even better about it. Even get better in the sense of, because what I'm still seeing, unfortunately, is some of these Black shows or Black scripts are being written by white men. I'm hoping that that's going to change, where you actually see whether it's Black consulting or something like that. I want to see more of that. I mean, the same thing with, even Asian scripts and stuff like that. I want to see where you have an Asian consultant as opposed to just having the white male write it. Because that can be a little bit, some of the language can be a little derogatory, or like, oh no, I can't believe they said it like that. Yeah. So it'd be nice if they had more Black consulting and Black creatives also in that side as well. But I think we have to keep going forward. I think it's going forward in that way, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Hank? Yeah, I did a question of what, going off of what Kumbi was saying, because like I said, that is a great point.
I'll take over for Hank.
Okay, that's okay. No problem.
I really want to have an honest conversation about the British invasion. Nobody really talks about it. And so one of the things I often talk about is Black American economic empowerment. That when consumers demanded more Black people on the screens, they weren't specific. And so you'll find that an overwhelming majority of these series regulars on these TV shows are Black British, and that oftentimes Black Americans are overlooked. I feel that is deliberate, but obviously I have no proof, but the numbers are there. Using All American as an example, Daniel Ezra, he's not Black American, right? And so what I do hope for is that we do make more of a concerted effort to also look at our local talent and not always just import talent.
Yeah,
I don't want to be. I don't want to play that, because obviously I'm Black British.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Go ahead, Sarah. This is what the discussion's about.
I hate to say it, but there's something about the training about Black British, British actors. Because even before, it's not even just Black British, it's white British as well. White British are taking over as well as Black British, because generally speaking, that's the idea of the training is better. I mean, we'll hire New York actors over LA actors because of training, Canadians over LA actors because of training. So there's this idea of LA actors being a little lackadaisical with their training. Oh, I'm so cute. I can just get by because I'm cute. I don't. That was a horrible thing. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have stereotyped that. But
it's accurate. Don't worry. Absolutely accurate.
There's something about that. When I look on an LA actor's resume, it's like a 6-week crash course with Ivana Chubbuck. I don't care. I want to see that you've done theater. I want to see you've done a 2-year training, not just a 6 weeks crash course. Whereas the British actors, the Canadian actors, the New York actors tend to do that. They'll train for years before they decide to branch out. So when you see their work, generally speaking, guys, please, this is just a generality, because obviously LA actors are amazing and there's still a lot of LA actors working. But generally speaking, they seem to be a little bit more polished somehow, even with their auditions and stuff, generally speaking. And I think that's why people tend to gravitate towards those kind of markets, because of that stereotype.
Right.
Yeah, the culture there is definitely oriented still towards spending that time inside of the theater, really getting broken down and rebuilt as an actor. And so when we're talking about some of the issues, the lack of discipline is the primary issue in some of our communities. But there are a lot of diamonds in the rough who are disciplined. And because they're not at a certain agency of a certain value, that's where they're getting overlooked. And that's what my concern is.
I also think when you talk about training, you have to go back to that conversation around barriers and barriers to access, where those spaces were not necessarily welcome to people who looked like us. And so there's definitely a disconnect there that is hopefully changing as well.
You're absolutely right. There's definitely that too. Because it's a financial burden to train and to take time off and do theater. It's a lot. And it's not everybody has access to that, especially like you said, people of color, who don't always have access to that. And it's unfortunate that they are being less considered than, like you said, the Black British, because a lot of times for some reason they have access to it. And hopefully, I think that's changing a little bit. You don't think so?
Oh, I remember my acting coach, David Renton, said to me when I was going to go full time into acting, he said, no, get a job. Because as an actor here in Nova Scotia, in Halifax, the jobs were far and few in between.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know, because when I'm, having conversations or just overhearing conversations with agents, the first thing they're most concerned about is whether or not the immigration attorney can get the visa that they need for the talent that they, want to control. And so I think that's part of the problem too, is that when you look into the backstories of a lot of these actors that are now being thrust into the limelight, homelessness is always the foundation of their story. And so when you're taking someone who has had to live in their car, has been homeless, has had all these terrible things happen to them, and then you bring just fame and success to them, you're going to have a level of loyalty. And that's why you now have these actors speaking out about how they were mistreated or told terrible things like, oh, you can only be a crackhead. Oh, you can only be a pregnant teen. Or, oh, nobody's going to want you. You're too black. You're just too black. You need to lighten yourself, And so I hope that going forward, when we have these honest conversations where you're seeing a board member at the CS, since we're not CSA anymore, the CS is telling you your discipline and lack of training is your barrier at this point. I feel like when we put out these things so that actionable items, actionable goals can be obtained by these actors, then if they don't meet them, then that's on them. But I think there's this air of mystery ultimately is the problem, because there's just so many different casting offices and everyone runs their business in their way. We don't really have best practices. And that's really what we need going forward.
Your training. That includes the people that are behind the camera, like we were talking about, the casting directors, new casting directors. The universities or the film schools need to have that part of their curriculum as casting your own show, and bringing in that scenario and diversity scenario within their training programs. NASCAD here at Nova Scotia Community College, their film program has to be toward that. I don't think they are right now. They're just going forward. Same as your acting programs that are here. We've got the Canadian Acting School in Toronto. There's really no acting classes here that are, except for Dalhousie University, teaching you stage acting. So we don't have a really good school here. It's more of a school of doing rather than learning. So the more you do, the more you learn.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so any thoughts? Any lasting thoughts before? Okay, well, we've come to the end of our discussion. So I just wanted to ask if there were any lasting thoughts on the, not even just the last question, but just the whole discussion before we wrap up. And Hank, I'll start with you.
Just that this is really good. I'm really proud of us for doing this because it is so important out here to get the expressions that are happening. And I appreciate having me on as a half white, half Mi'kmaq person. But with my experience in this program, I'm really glad that this is happening.
Yes, thank you. Kumbi?
Similarly, yeah, thank you for having me. I think if anyone has watched up until this point, I would assume that they have an interest either in casting or maybe they're a director or a producer. So I would just say, if you are casting for yourself and you put out a submission and you don't receive the diversity that you were hoping for or looking for, just know that we are still, unfortunately, in a time where you need to put in the extra effort to keep looking for it. I think we still need to go into the communities and reach out, and they're not just necessarily going to to come to us. And so, yeah, that's probably just what I would leave, is that you can't complain that they're not there, because we are here, but we may not have those access points. So you need to find us.
Okay, thank you. Tiana?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about communication, because unfortunately, casting directors' hands are tied. There will be times where they put in information in the breakdowns, for instance, that are of value, but then the breakdowns legal department tells them you can't say that. And they're just extrapolating from a script. So I can use a prime example where a casting director called me to tell me that the script referred to the character as a high yeller guy, but she couldn't put in the description that he was light skinned or yellow because of backlash and all of those things. And so that's where casting directors, their hands are tied, right? Exactly. And she doesn't have time to call 1,000 agencies to tell them this. Right. So I think that, sometimes it is about boots on the ground, just going back and networking and all of that. And then with trusted people, having those candid conversations so that those submissions are targeted versus, not getting exactly what you need because you aren't allowed to say what you need.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Zora.
Yeah, exactly what she said. What Tiana said is that we have to have these conversations. We have to keep communicating. And that's some of the things that, even on the board of directors, we have meetings with SAG, with the union, with breakdowns, with all these different groups, because like the language, like Tiana was saying about certain things that can and cannot be said. And it ties us up as casting directors. So we're trying to have conversations with unions, with all these different departments, and we have to keep talking. We have to keep communicating and having these conversations. That's why it's great that you guys are having this conversation too, because if we don't, then we're going to stay stuck.
That's right. And yeah, it's time. It's time to move on. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, you know what? Thank you, Hank, Zora, Tiana, and Kumbi for being a part of this panel. It's been a pleasure. And on behalf of the Halifax Black Film Festival, thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this discussion, and we hope to see you at this year's festival.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.